We have a really interesting and diverse panel here. We have two companies that are really startups. We have Boxed, we've got Lyft, and in Lyft we have a startup within a startup. We also have Google, which is a startup, but in a very different phase of startup. You know, it's become quite a mature business and one of the obviously most profitable companies in the world. And then we have Mastercard, which is credit cards, obviously, and so much more. And Mastercard is a very mature business, and they needed also to stay innovative and stay current. So again, my name is Meeka Bondy. I'm SVP of Legal Affairs at HBO. And just a short background on me, I have spent my entire legal career in the techie kind of field. I started at a law firm that focused on computer software. We actually it was considered the first computer software firm. And then that went defunct. And then I went to Time Inc. New Media. Well, actually, Time Inc. in the legal department, but servicing Time Inc. New Media, and that went defunct. And then I went to Maestro TV, which was a startup within Time Warner, and that also went defunct. So there's a bit of a theme with technology, is that you may show up somewhere and then there's nothing to do anymore, and then you have to move on. HBO, on the other hand, I've been at for 13 years, so I've had a little bit of stability, but even within HBO, as you can imagine, with Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, we have a lot of challenges and a lot of competitors in the space that they grew up differently than we did, so we have to keep current as well. But Game of Thrones is coming, so sign up. Here I have Naeem Ishaq from Boxed. He's a CFO, and he actually has lived in the entrepreneurial space since he was at the University of California and actually started a startup there, and has been in varying finance and strategy roles from Intel to Salesforce and Square, and now he just joined Boxed last summer. To his left is Omar Nagji. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, please correct me. Who is at Lyft, and as I mentioned, Lyft, as we all know, is sort of like Uber, but maybe better, I don't know. And they actually took their existing technology in the transportation space and expanded it into healthcare. So you'll hear a little bit more about that, because that's something that I actually didn't know until we talked, and something that most of you probably don't know and probably can't figure out how that could actually happen. And then we have Karen Sumberg, who is at Google. She leads the America's Diversity Group. And she was also sort of an entrepreneur. She started with Center for Talent Innovation. She was an EVP and a principal there, but it didn't start with her, signing up to get an EVP job. She started as a founder and helped grow that company, and then was tapped by Google to focus on diversity in the Americas. And then we have finally John Sheldon, who is SVP of Innovation Management for Mastercard Labs. So again, he is at a mature company, but that company obviously put some effort and support against disrupting within so that they could stay current. And he has had various roles at eBay, Enterprise, Ogilvy, BBH, Oracle, Pricewaterhouse Customer Portfolios, which is actually a data analytics company, I believe, that you founded many years ago. So I think we have a fabulous panel, and so I wanted to again, this panel is about driving inclusion with tech and the rapid transformation and building new markets. So I guess I will start with Naeem. Sure. About the role of technology, and I think in the case of Boxed, the role of technology was paramount to the start of Boxed. It is exactly why Boxed started. So I thought maybe, Naeem, you could sort of tell us about how Boxed started and how you made your way there.
Sure. So Boxed, for those of you who aren't familiar with the company, is a pure play e-commerce organization that is trying to bring the club or wholesale model online. So club stores are places like Costco or Sam's, and BJ's are really the three dominant players in the U.S. But the penetration online and on mobile is virtually non-existent. And so it was born out of the experience of one of our co-founders and our CEO, Che Wong, who grew up, like myself, on weekends going to the Price Club with his parents. Mm-hmm. And as a young man here in Manhattan, found that it was just really difficult to get to Costco way uptown. And further, he didn't have a car, which, as a millennial, this is a pretty common problem. And as a classic entrepreneurial and blissful ignorance, I'll call it, said, well, that's stupid. Like, we can fix that problem. And while in doing so, took on, of course, a massive market opportunity that has enabled us to grow very, very rapidly. We have yet to hit even our 4th year since we started shipping product. But in that time frame, we've only disclosed that we're doing well north of $100 million in revenues now.
Amazing.
Yeah, so we're very excited about that. Box is a company that's very focused around serving its customers, of course, but then also its community and its employees. It's I guess appropriate. We were coming right after a discussion about millennials. People often describe Box as the Costco for millennials, and one of the things about our value proposition is it goes beyond just price. Of course, we are concerned about price, and we do deliver incredible value to our customers. But we also believe that how we're connected to the mission of our company and the values of our employees and our customers is a really important part of what we do, and I know Lyft believes that very strongly as well. So I found my way to Box through a common investor from my last company, Square, and Boxed, and had a chance to meet with Jay over dinner one night while I serendipitously just happened to be in New York. And I'll tell you, to be honest, after I walked away and understood what they were trying to do and understood his passion for serving their mission, I couldn't help but join. And so I moved myself and my wife over here about a year ago.
What I find interesting about what Naeem is saying is that, even though technology drove the startup of Box, it started with a consumer need. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of these big companies around the world, they sort of forget what their business is. You have to start with the consumer and what they need, and then decide how do you fix that problem. It's sort of like what somebody else said before, that innovation is not created by itself; it's in order to solve a problem. Yeah, and so I think that there's that piece there that a lot of technology companies share, is that they really focus, zero in on the consumer's needs.
And the backgrounds of the 4 co-founders all came from mobile gaming, right? So it's interesting when you see people who, how do you go from trying to sell pink cows online in a digital form to selling toilet paper online? It doesn't seem to be a lot of commonality there, but if you take a technology-first approach to solving a real problem, rather than starting from a point of, well, how do I make a business to enrich myself, you often result in a really great outcome, and we'll continue to do that going forward.
Terrific. So Omar, I think it's so interesting to hear Lyft and healthcare in the same sentence. So perhaps you could spend a little time. You could spend a little time talking about Lyft and sort of what that is for those of the audience that don't know what Lyft is, and how did it sort of morph into healthcare. And Omar, I know that your background really is in the healthcare space. So sort of how you found your way to what looked like a transportation company.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, it's great to be on the panel, especially one that says driving and tech in it, so that's perfect. Lyft, for those that don't know, is a rideshare company. Our co-founders, John Zimmer and Logan Green, actually founded a different company called Zimride in 2007 with the guise of, Logan was at school at San Luis Obispo in Southern California. His girlfriend was in Los Angeles. John Zimmer came from New York with a hospitality background, and they tried to solve the issue of getting college students from campus to their families and to their friends across California. So whether that was a shorter haul from SLO to LAX or a longer haul up to San Francisco, it was nearly impossible. 2007, couldn't have a car, there was no ride share, there's no public transportation that's reliable in California, and so they created Zimride. And from there, they sold it off to Enterprise, and they kind of formed into this new company that we now know as Lyft. So it's the point-to-point kind of rideshare company. People always ask, well, why is it pink? Why is there a mustache? A lot of the reason Lyft was created was initially for a female-only rideshare company, and the pink color denotes that, and then also with the mustache, it's a very unassuming and inviting piece of art, you can call it. And so from there,
I wouldn't call it though.
We'll call it art. I'm sure someone's going to tweet that. So from there, it was similar to what you were saying, Naeem, in the New York area with Boxed. John and Logan realized, well, this is something that can really expand. And in 2012, that's where, you kind of see Lyft expand from San Francisco into LA, New York, et cetera. And then the way I was brought into Lyft was really through the healthcare lens. So as Meeka had mentioned, I've been in healthcare for a while, everything from the operations side to financial side. Actually studied healthcare in the University of North Carolina, go Tar Heels, and realized throughout every single position and every lesson learned that we got, whether it was starting with consulting into a lot of the software side, into more of the operations side, that transportation and access to care has been one of the longest standing barriers to quality outcomes and to improving outcomes across the U.S., whether it's within metro areas like New York or even suburban areas and rural areas like New Jersey, the entire state. That was a joke. So there you go.
I live there.
So, we came together. I've known a couple of the initial folks at Lyft. We came together and started what we now call Lyft Care, or the healthcare side of Lyft, where we really focus on bringing patients into and out of hospitals, clinics, and even working with insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield to get patients the ability to have transportation so we can start breaking down that barrier, increasing the overall outcomes, and really looking at the community, and as we talk about the vision, reconnecting those people and those patients with their communities through better access to and better quality outcomes of care.
It's fascinating, and I think some of the themes for me that come out of that are sort of taking an existing form of technology and seeing another consumer need and sort of seeing how that could build a new market. And also, there's this purpose-driven sort of feeling, and I'm seeing it across companies. A lot of the marketing is around that, and millennials talk about it often, that they have to feel connected to the company, not just the people, but the sort of the mission and the purpose of the company. So I think that sort of the healthcare piece in particular.
Absolutely.
Feels
So
like
if you
that.
look at the vision and the mission of most health systems, is to really promote the well-being of their members and of their patients. And part of that is reconnecting them into their communities. And as you look again at the vision of Lyft, which is reconnecting people and communities through the world's best transportation, there is a humongous alignment in that vision, and it became obviously very, very just apparent that both of these types of industries, Lyft in the transportation sense and everything in healthcare, would really make sense, because with those two companies and those two verticals combined, there's really no stopping getting that quality of care out there.
So I was going to move to John, because I think you're also in a very interesting position, because, again, we have MasterCards, and I know it's more than credit cards. Feel free to tell us a little bit more about what MasterCard does. I am a MasterCard holder. But he came, he had a lot of different experiences across a lot of different companies. But then he came there to be truly a disruptive force within his company. And John, so if you could tell us a little bit about your role, and I think one thing that stood out to me when we spoke was that innovation comes in many different shapes and sizes.
Great, yeah. So, if anybody who stepped out of a Lyft car in the last 4 years would recognize that, MasterCard's hero moment, right, where you're pulling something out of your wallet and swiping. In some ways that new technologies like Lyft are taking what used to be our hero moment and pushing them to the back. So, we founded a labs organization inside of Mastercard about 7 years ago to look at all the new and disruptive technologies and to look at the future from a fresh perspective. And the intent is to help both our company to innovate and make sure that we can keep up with the times, but also to help our customers, banks and merchants, not always known for being the most innovative in their own right, to help them become equally innovative and be able to apply the changes that the customer experience, like a Lyft, is happening in their world. So much of the work we do in our labs organization is try to create end-to-end connected commerce experiences. Right? We want to find new ways to create value before the transaction, of course during the transaction, and then after the transaction. So we have loyalty programs, and we use our data in really meaningful and powerful ways. We have $1 billion data business that helps us to make sure people find the best connected experiences for themselves. You're right that it takes so many different forms. Internally at Mastercard, we have all kinds of programs to elicit the best ideas from our employees. We also have programs where we look outside our four walls with startups or our customers to innovate in those locations as well. we talked a little bit about a program internally we call Idea Box, where any employee at Mastercard can respond to a series of challenges that our team puts out and put their idea forward. And if we like that idea, I'll give them a box, and it's got money in it. They've got a coach that's associated with it. There's T-shirts and cookies and stuff in there. But then the meaningful pieces are, there's the money, there's the coach, and then my favorite part is when they see the countdown clock. Because along with getting that box is a countdown clock that says 60 days from now you have to pitch me your idea. And if I like it, I'll go reach behind and grab the next box, and that's got 25 grand in it. So it's time for you to go get a team. Wow. I'm going to assign you an EVP in our company, and 90 days from you getting the second box, you're pitching the CEO of Mastercard. That's pitching the CEO of a $130 billion company your idea. And if he likes it, you join the Labs team to bring that to market. Last year I gave away 30 boxes, and 4 of them made their way all the way to the CEO. And 3 of them are actually in process now to go to market in varying ways. So really cool way to engage folks. And again, that happens all over the world, right? A lot of the boxes come from our Singapore and our Pune and Vadodara offices, as well as, of course, in the U.S.
So that's really fascinating, because I think particularly mature companies will struggle with how to create an innovation culture. Mm-hmm. And so I think in your case, it started with the consumer, the end-to-end concept. Like, you're really looking at how is a consumer experiencing this before, during, and after the transaction. And then the other thing is this sort of the innovation coming in many forms. And I think somebody on the last panel talked about iterative, allowing for iterative things to happen. And I know, like, in many mature companies, you feel like you have to have a fully baked whole new business to present and then have that approved. And that's a lot harder to approve than, just an incremental change that might either save the company some money, maybe save people some time, might just maybe move the needle a little bit. But those innovations are, when you add them all up over the course of a year or more, it really can drive the company into a much more profitable state. So Karen, I thought if you could spend some time sort of talking about how you started. It takes a lot of guts, even when you're young, to start a new business and to be a consultant and to, I'm sure there are a lot of challenges and things that happen along the way, and then deciding to join Google and giving up your entrepreneurial side, but of course joining a large organization, but an organization that the culture is based on innovation. So I thought you could spend some time talking about your story.
So when I was at the Center for Talent Innovation, which was started by Sylvia Hewlett, but I helped found the consulting side. Right. So, Sylvia did not take credit for starting CTI. I don't want that tweet to go out. We have a nice relationship, so I'd like to keep it that way. So we started the consulting side, which was really Center for Talent Innovation as a research organization, and we were getting a lot of the companies we work with and who sponsored our research coming and saying, how do I actually apply this research? And so it was a really interesting problem to solve, which is, okay, how do you take this more high-level theoretical piece of work and actually apply it? And so it was a really exciting thing to do, and the exciting thing about being entrepreneurial is you just make things up, you just sell people on ideas, and then you have to go do it. So nobody gave me a box, but it was sort of similar. It's like we would sell an idea, and then we'd walk out and be like, okay, now I have to go figure out how to do that. But make it sound like I'd done it a lot before. So it was an exciting thing to do, and it was exciting to grow the business. But then going inside to Google and being able to join a pretty entrepreneurial, actually, HR team, which you don't hear those two things a lot. But HR is very entrepreneurial, I think, and see how to really start to embed diversity and inclusion into everything that the company does. And at the time that I joined, they were really growing the diversity team because we had a new mandate around it within the company. And so I have a team now of 11, and that's the Americas, and then we have a global team as well, or a APAC and EMEA team, and we're internal consultants to the business. And so what we focus on is really how do we grow and retain talent, but also how do we embed diversity and inclusion into products and processes. And so, last week we had I/O, which was our developer conference, and one of the things that was released was Google Lens, which is our new lens, which can identify objects, and that was something that we worked with them on, because a camera lens, when it was created, when Kodak created their lens, was meant to capture white skin really well, but not other skin tones and not other objects. And so it actually became a really, true story. And so it was a big, how do we make sure that the lens that's being creative is actually able to capture all kinds of skin tones, and then along with that as that extends to objects and colors and all kinds of things. So it was a really interesting, kind of gnarly developer problem and technical problem, but also then how do we engage Googlers in that? And not like what we sometimes have seen previously, I think, at other companies I worked at, not at Google, where it's like, I need to test something and I need to test it on some black people, so I guess I'll just talk to the ERG about that, which, nobody wants to feel like they're a guinea pig. And so how do we actually engage Googlers in a meaningful way in this innovation process, even if they're not on the team, even if they will, never touch that product. And so that's been actually a big thing we've been working on. The other thing is, as we go out to market with different products, how are we reaching different developers? How are we reaching different users? Are we just designing things for ourselves or for what we look like as a majority, and making sure that that's not actually the case?
That's really interesting, and I think we talked a bit today about IQ and moving to EQ and then moving to CQ. So at the very least, you are bringing this sort of cultural lens and cultural sensitivity to developers, to the business people, and just trying to embed it into everybody's minds and everything they do. So speaking of culture, I think that, there's a saying, I forget who said it, but that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you may have heard that saying. That's right, Peter Drucker. And it's really true. You can talk and you can have the McKinseys come in, no offense to McKinsey's, but you can have the McKinseys come in and come up with great charts about how to change your strategy, how to restructure yourselves, and then voila, you're going to be suddenly this incredibly innovative company. But we all know that's not how it works. People have fiefdoms. People get scared about change. They're territorial. They don't have the new skill sets they need. So I just wondered if I would start with Naeem, about you had a very interesting saying at Boxed about how innovation is just embedded in the culture, and how do you drive it every day? Because like anything else, if you don't keep at it, you end up losing that part of your mindset.
Yeah, so I would start with just a general orientation. I think what you're referring to about how we prioritize our efforts and sort of a little bit of an internal monitor ourselves of it every day is, if you're making any decision in the company, there's a pretty straightforward order or hierarchy you should follow. Number one, you have to put your customer first. Number two, your company. 3, your team, and yourself last. And I think if you generally follow that approach, then it'll guide you to long-term good decisions and avoid short-term decisions, whether it's about kind of battling within the company about your territory versus someone else's, or about trying to get an edge and maybe hitting that promotion, even if it isn't perhaps in the long-term best interest of your company as a whole or for your customer. Now, there's a second part of that question, which is how do you ensure that the culture stays vibrant around innovation? I think you have to enable failure in a safe way. So it was interesting to hear your background about a couple of places you've worked with, and it is not uncommon to see that. My first company, I started a startup when I was an undergrad at UC Davis, and we failed after a couple of years, but it was I would never have replaced that experience. I learned so much through it. And if you have a culture that doesn't tolerate failure and in fact acknowledge the risk-taking and the effort, then you'll never come up with anything really great and anything really new. And so you have to remind yourselves that if there are efforts that don't quite make it, understand the why of it, learn from that, and apply it to the next project that you work on, and make sure that those folks who are pushing those efforts forward feel acknowledged for that effort, and that they embrace the learning from it too.
That's really, I love the customer, company, team, and then you. Most of us would reverse that probably. So we all have to maybe change our mindset. Omar, I thought you would talk a little bit, Lyft started as a startup, so at some level the mindset of innovation and risk-taking is sort of embedded from the beginning. But you're still like a startup within a startup, and there might be times where the startup within startups goals or what they're trying to do might not exactly mesh with what the existing business is, even though they're both startups. So I just wondered if you could talk to a little bit about whether you've found challenges in that regard, or if actually it's also, everyone's on the same page and that it's not a challenge.
Yeah, so it's actually been quite a blessing. So if you step back, and again, initially when I was talking about Lyft's vision, embedded in there is the culture. So we're a people-first organization. So that people-first comes in from whether it's dealing with our riders, our drivers, our employees, our partners. Mm-hmm. And it's a top-down approach. So it does come from our co-founders, and it permeates throughout the entire organization. And as a result, it goes into our drivers, which then treats our riders better, which essentially gets the entire circle going from a culture standpoint. So understanding that, and then looking at the healthcare piece and the startup within a startup, which it truly is, we realized that, so first off, even outside of the healthcare side, the entire sales organization is very new at Lyft. It's about a year and a half, maybe 2 years old, which is crazy to think about, right? So you have this $8 billion company with a 2-year sales team. That's nuts. And so within that, there's obviously a lot of challenges, mainly internally and growing challenges, not necessarily challenges where you're butting up with potentially the larger parent company. And so what we did within the healthcare side is really embrace the concept of people first. So knowing how healthcare is, and how much time it takes to get folks up and running within healthcare, and on certain, whether it's technologies, whether it's different behaviors, whether it's different solutions, we created an entire account management team that did not exist within Lyft, primarily to handhold and to help our clients and our partners where they need it. And the reason we did that is, again, thinking through that high level kind of top line culture piece where we're a people-first company. So we brought that and really embraced it to create a new model that no other place in Lyft has, but because we wanted to make sure that our partners are viewed first, and so that ultimately the business is benefiting, our partners are benefiting, and then we as a team and an individual are benefiting as well.
That's really interesting. Karen, I thought you could spend some time, because you're not a business unit per se, but you're adding this whole flavor and lens to a very innovative company. And there are people who have different views about diversity. I think we heard about it earlier today, that sometimes people are almost hostile to it or agnostic. So I was interested to hear that, in fact, in Karen's case, she has more demand than she can do with her 11-person team. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the culture of Google, that they're really embracing you and they're actually seeking you out, and not the other way around. It's not a mandate where, oh, here comes Karen, we have to work with her to check off a box.
Well, sometimes.
Okay.
Just depends on the relationship I have. Back again. So when I first started, we didn't have that demand, but I think as it started with data, right? Google's a highly analytical company. As in our search algorithms, we're all about analytics. So applying that to diversity was really important, and giving people visibility to their numbers, what their organization looked like through a number of lenses, and debunking some of the myths that were out there, right? In the absence of data, people just go off of anything. Really helped to start the conversation, I would say, with a lot of leaders, because it then ends up being like, well, what do I do? What do I do about this? And then you're like, okay, what do you do? So, then you're able to have.
Was there any ambivalence about sharing that?
So yes, initially, but I think, and Meeka could probably speak to the how legal might feel about that. But I make nice with legal too, so that they give us a lot. Yeah, so they give us a lot of leeway. I would say that the more transparency that we have given, peel back the curtain, the better. And often the result is not like the worst case scenario that somebody's going to go run and do something errant with that. It usually is actually a really good outcome, and with Googlers at large and with leaders. I think, though, the double edge to that is that because we're very analytical and you start showing data, people are like, well, what if we looked at it this way? And what if you cut it this way? And so, if somebody didn't have an organization that looked so great, or maybe some numbers that didn't look so good, you have to kind of get into this place where you're like, look, you can, like, cutting bad by bad by bad, it's still bad. So we can cut it 7 different ways. It's not going to look any different. Like, you don't have a lot of diversity in your organization. And so we need to just start talking about that and stop trying to, like, fix the number. Like, think it's going to happen if we play with the numbers. So I would say now, one, there's an expectation that the data will keep coming, and leaders do have transparency to their data on a regular basis. And the second piece of that is getting into these more meaningful conversations outside of the data, which are things like, how are you going to lead this organization, and what are the cues that you might be giving that you can show that you care about this topic, that you're making meaningful progress on it, and getting into more of the soft stuff, which I think a lot of people were not expecting to go to. But what we've said is, like, you need to balance these two pieces. It has to be the business, but we are only as good as our people. And so if we are not thinking about these things, thinking about our culture in a meaningful way, and if you're not doing it at a leadership level, it's not happening. So the tone at the top is so important. We have a lot of grassroots at Google. As a sort of laughed, like, we still think of ourselves as a startup, even though we're kind of not really a startup, and we're grappling with that identity crisis right now. We're 18, so we're kind of like going to college, and we're like, I'm a startup, but I'm kind of an adult now. So, between those two worlds, the innovation is still there, and the ability to go and do is very present at Google. Like, you can go run and try whatever you want. But on the other hand, we do have to do a little bit of, like, we actually need to stay the course and not keep trying to do 100 new things, because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so that's, I think, created a lot more of the demand, which is like, we're now in the marathon.
Right.
And so it's a lot of water stations and pep talks and grappling now with some other conversations, right? You all, like, a lot with diversity, you start with gender because it's an easier conversation. And now we're starting to grapple with race, and that is really not comfortable for everyone. And so, that's a big water station that we're out right now, like, really working with leaders, with Googlers, on grappling with their own racial identities, and then how that impacts the culture that we have.
Really, that's fascinating, and I really admire you for sort of carrying the torch inside of Google. John, because you're a disruptor within a pretty mature business, and I thought you could spend some time, I would imagine that there are times that somebody really doesn't want you disrupting or changing the way they do things. And one thing that struck me that you said was that there is this sort of tension between thinking about new ways of doing things, because that gets messy and stuff. And then on the other hand, the card has to work, right? Like, it has to work every time. So there is this tension between sort of, and this is a question I asked earlier, this sort of reliability, that the operational efficiency and the accuracy is just, the trains are running on time, versus, think about it in a different way. And I would imagine that would conflict with each other. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you navigate through that, and do you have support from management?
Yeah, we created a separate business unit to house our innovation, because all the things that go with innovation are the opposite of what people want from their card networks, if you will, right, as they operate, right? Moving fast, breaking things, pivoting, pulling things on and off the market, changing business models are inconsistent with, I dip my card and it works, right? So we needed to protect the innovations from the demands of the kind of the mothership of the business, which is, by the way, still growing and growing very well. But we also, by the way, had to protect we had to protect the big business from innovation. We also have to protect the innovations from the big business, right? And I think we can understand if we immediately impose all of Mastercard's requirements onto the innovations, everything will die right away, right? So we had to create that space that allowed those to get going and get growing. The way there's a misconception in how innovation works, particularly in a business that has a lot of maturity to it. A lot of people think that the great innovations in a business like ours are from somebody walking up and saying, I don't understand why they do that, and they cut it out, and that feels like innovation. But people come talk to me about that kind of thing all the time. There's a concept known as, I'm going to blow it, but I think it's called Chesterton's fence. Right? The idea starts with, hey, I don't know why that fence is here, let's take it down. But when people come to me with stories like that, and I say, if you don't know why it's there, you can't cut it down until you know why it's there. Then come tell me why it doesn't have to be there, and let's talk. Right? That concept of making sure your innovations are cognizant of the history that your business has and why you're doing the things that you're doing. It still might not make sense, but at least know why it was there in the first place.
Right.
And so a lot of the work that we do on our innovation side is to assure that mothership business, we're not just cutting down fences every time we see something that doesn't make sense, but we know why it's there and now it's no longer needed. And that's a big part of that, the way you drive forward innovation in an environment like that.
Do you also ask when they ask to build the fence? No, just kidding. So I think we have I wanted to sort of get to the more personal part of your stories. In this environment where change is constant, technology is key, innovation is key, what could you, each of you, sort of say what you think are some of the top traits that you look for or try to exhibit in yourself in order to stay current and engaged?
I think like a lot of yes. So
it
seems like a really but it's a harder thing to do because you get into exactly what John was just describing, right? This sort of like, well, we've done it this way, so I guess we could take that away, but the history of it is this. Like, you can get into really deep narratives of all the reasons why something wouldn't work, and I think, from my perspective, especially in the diversity space, like, you can think like, well, but what about this and this, and so in listening to my business leaders talk about things, and they're like, well, what about this? Sometimes my initial response when I first started was like, well, I think that, this has been tried, and it's a lot easier to just say, yeah, okay, so let's figure out how to make that work. And then you can shape the conversation however you want, or you can drive it in any way or take those inputs. But I often see a lot of no's, and I see no's from those leaders and other things. And so getting people to yes and making sure that I'm doing that and my team is doing that.
I guess projecting an optimistic outlook is a good thing.
Yeah, it's the improv, right? It's the yes and. So it's the like, yes, and we could also add this thing on.
Right. Not even yes, but yes and.
Yes.
Anyone else?
I would add on to that to say, part of also saying yes is don't be, as you mentioned, don't be scared to fail. So I remember I was in a nice, cushy consulting job here in New York for 4 years, and got offered a position at this weird thing called business analytics in healthcare in San Francisco, where I knew one person who I wasn't really that good friends with. And I said, you know what? Why not? Let's do it. So I went out there, learned an entirely different part of healthcare that I had no idea about, didn't really know what business intelligence or business analytics was. Figured I'd go out there in a new city, a new job, a new mini field within the field I was in. And if I failed, I can always come back to New York and be a consultant. Everybody's a consultant in New York, or a banker. Sure, why not? So it was because of that, and I think I actually got that from my parents. Coming over, I'm first generation. I think Rebecca was as well. But seeing them move from New York to Chicago to North Carolina to Arizona, pursuing different opportunities, sometimes doing very well, sometimes not doing very well, but never having the fear of saying, well, what happens if? Screw that. Let's just do it, look forward, and what doesn't work, learn from it, and keep moving ahead.
And I would add to that too. There's one thing I've tried to do over the course of my career that I think has been critical for my advancement is to find the scariest thing I could possibly go after and then embrace it. and just kind of jump right into the fire. So not being afraid to take risks, and anytime the other piece, so I'd add to that too, is as soon as I start to feel comfortable, maybe for better or worse, who knows, I feel like I need to change in some way. And I know there's folks who've, I remember if I go back, I was at Intel earlier in my career, and then I had an opportunity to join Salesforce at a time when people were like, Salesforce? What is Salesforce? Like, you're leaving Intel, this big, amazing brand, and just like 2-bit startup. Like, why are you doing that? I'm just like, trust me, this is going to be a good one. And then same thing, I had an opportunity to take a really senior vice president role running investor relations at Salesforce really early in my career, or to go to Square at a time when it was also like this, I think cute little thing, and it's going to be destroyed by the entire payments industry had barely allowed it, and were actively, pardon me, trying to eliminate it.
Great partner.
Yeah, eventually, yes. Visa was the investor. But eventually I looked at the two alternatives: staying where it was in a more cushy, comfortable role, or joining another startup and trying to reinvent myself and learn while doing so. I chose to do that. And the same thing about joining Box. So I think especially amongst Asian Americans, and somewhat ironic, right? I'm a first generation Asian American too. And you often have folks who are the most risk taking, right? Imagine how crazy you have to be in terms of risk to like leave your country, and often without even knowing the local language, and embrace that. And then you counteract that by teaching your children to not take any risk and go be the lawyer, the doctor, wherever. It's such a common story. And a great irony too. So pushing against that and encouraging, reminding yourself to always do that. It's been important for me. And then as I've mentored other folks of that background in particular, reminding them not to fall into that trap, because you really limit your potential and growth by doing so.
Right. Karen and John?
Yeah, when I think, it ties a little bit to what we heard in the previous session. When I think about what makes me happy in a job, or what makes, I think, people on a broad basis happy in a job, it typically comes down to finding joy in one of three things. The first is in the tasks that you perform every day, right? That you really like working on spreadsheets or what have you. More and more as you get more mature in your career, it's less likely to be the place you find joy. The second is liking the team that you work with, right? And really connecting, holding hands, and being committed as a team. There's a sets of people I've worked with that I don't care what we're doing. If we're doing it together, it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have a lot of success, and I'm going to really find a way to enjoy that. And then the third piece is finding purpose, right? Making sure that you're really connected to the specifics of why you're involved in this particular industry. For me with that, at Mastercard today is one of the things I do is I run our financial inclusion portfolio. So this is getting the 2 billion adults that don't have proper access to banks and financial accounts connected up in places like India, Malaysia, Indonesia, and beyond. There's just an absolute ton of purpose behind that. Now, it has incredibly strategic for Mastercard, right? 85% of the world's transactions are still done in cash, and if people don't have access to a bank, they can't do the other thing, right? We need them to move over. So it's an important strategy pillar for us, but also has incredibly positive impact on their lives when they get connected to these tools to be able to mitigate risk, plan for their futures, and just generally lead a better life. Mobility, lots of things come with that. And so, that gives me the purpose and the energy to kind of come at this. And if we're talking about millennials and others just being attracted into workplaces, if you can bring that sense of purpose to it, it's had an amazing impact on our business inside of Mastercard in terms of retention, in terms of feeling the positivity by both our employees, our partners, and our customers who realize that this is something that we're doing that's both positive for the world. We call it doing well by doing good. It's positive for the world, but it has a huge impact on our business as well. So I always think about those three things together, and you only really need one of them to be happy in your job. I like to have all three, of course, but for me, that's how I think about it.
That's great. So I think it's probably a good time to pause for questions. But we heard a lot about the role of technology in companies, both from the startup and then even within a mature business. We learned that you shouldn't be scared of failing or scared of change. And we also heard a lot about being sort of purpose-driven, feeling connected to the business, feeling like what you do has meaning. And so I'll pause here and open it up to the audience for questions.
I'm not afraid to call on people. There you go.
So it's very interesting to hear the perspectives of all these different companies, but I'm interested in asking you, what do you do to protect your customers for identity theft, and what keeps you up at night when it comes to technology and keeping your companies and your databases safe?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a dedicated information security team that focuses only on this. I think that as a key priority is really important. You have to segregate access to that information, PII, internally have controls around that. And that, I think for a mature company like Mastercard, I mean, this is their business, like it is so core to what they do, but for startups it often isn't, or it can become an afterthought. So you have to be really careful. And it goes back to your values, right? If you value your customers' privacy, then you will make it a priority and you'll work actively to protect that. And if you don't truly value that, then perhaps you run the risk of going astray.
Yeah, just to jump in there, I'm sure Google has a perspective on this also. Mastercard really handles this in two ways. Number one is we actually don't have your PII data at Mastercard. All we know is a 16-digit number. Now your banks have that data, but we don't. And our job as a technology company is to intermediate between the merchant, and the banks on either side of that transaction to make sure it happens. But we obscure who you are through a 16-digit number, and that's the only thing we know about you. So that's on one side. So we protect ourselves by actually not having the data. On the other side, of course, everybody else in that equation does have the data. And so much of the work that we do goes into helping them protect that data as well. So we have all kinds of things now around tokenization of that 16-digit number and of that PII data. And we literally have a cast of thousands really focused on this because truthfully, trust, MasterCard, if it's anything, is a trust mark. And the second that starts to erode, our business gets hurt. And so you can be assured we take that piece extremely seriously because the whole business is predicated on our ability to help our customers be successful there.
I mean, yeah, we take it really seriously. I mean, everybody has to go through training about what are because you can see people's data sometimes and different, with customers and things like that. So, and accounts. So it's taken pretty seriously. I think what's interesting sometimes is there's a disconnect between that and then how we think about our internal employees, and that data is very protected as well, obviously. And so sometimes with the best of intentions, people will say, I want to sit down, or I want to know who the women in my organization are, and we're always like, you can't just have a list of women, right? Right? It's sort of this commodization of people, right? Tell me who the Asians are. It's that's uncomfortable. Sometimes you have to be say that again to me, and I want you to think about it. Think about it. Say it out loud again. So it's an interesting translation because it's something we take so seriously as a company, and that we're all trained on, and God forbid you breach and any of those things. But then when we think about it internally and are thinking about it from this diversity perspective, it's a little bit of these are people, right? And so, yeah.
There was another question, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, you are more in the tech industries or related, let's say, industries. But I'm from PepsiCo, and I'm sure there are a lot of more traditional, companies where the digital transformation is starting or will start or has to start. So what will be the advice from your perspective for those companies? Where do you start?
That's a loaded question.
Well, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I think about the end-to-end experience, right? Grabbing a Pepsi or Mountain Dew or what have you is not just the moment when you unscrew the cap, right? The brand stands for so much more, but also the experience of from the moment that I think I want to have refreshment, or that you convince me that I want to have refreshment, to me feeling good about myself afterward for it, is a much broader experience than just the specific act. And pretty much everything other than the drinking of the drink, for example, could potentially have a digital component to it, right? And I think you can find ways to extend that experience and make it much more interesting, enjoyable, and so on. One thing that we're doing right now is working. It's about we're payments guys. Is we're working on payments with vending machines. Right? There's 25 million vending machines in the world. Only about by the way, 5 million of those are in Japan. Only about 10% of those are actually connected, so they can take cards and can do anything intelligent other than vend. But we're working to actually light up the other 90% of those with really interesting experiences, including, by the way, I can actually send you a Pepsi, when you're in another city and I can. Are you standing in front of that? Okay, it's going to vend to you right now, and actually go ahead and do that. So you can make those experiences, much more interesting and much more meaningful.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. I would add to that too. Again, speaking as the finance person on the panel, work closely with your finance organization so that you don't fall for the temptation of eating your seed corn. I think the burden of expectations too early on, and I think there's a trap to say, okay, well, what are your revenue projections going to be? And you try to track really closely, and you don't leave enough oxygen for them to experiment. And I see that very commonly in large corporations, where with the best of intentions, people are trying to do their jobs well. So I don't want to say you want to kind of insulate them entirely, but in some ways you really do need to do that and create enough room, and that hopefully the leadership team understands that effect of it, and that when it comes to setting expectations for the street and your guidance, that you leave some room so that you can hopefully overperform if it works, and if it doesn't, then there's no harm in that.
I would say also doing like a little bit of a gap analysis on like what are your values and then what do you actually value and like in practice. I think that's been a useful exercise, definitely for our team, which is where we've done, okay, we value having an impact, and that we're the experience of Googlers and all of these different things, yet some of the things that run counter to that are the actual things that we value are getting things done fast. Well, that can be good or that can be bad, right? If you need a longer runway, and people are pressuring you, are you going to compromise the value that we actually need a longer runway because you're capitulating to this other piece? So I think doing some of that exercise and really being strong about that has been helpful.
I would say continue to revisit what the need or the challenge was. Always make sure that wherever you're going, you can look back and say, well, whatever we've done, have we met the initial challenge, have we met the initial need, and have we made it better? Because if not, you can have a bunch of perceived value, but the actual value is never going to get to where you were supposed to go.
Mm-hmm. We have time for any more questions? I think I saw one back there, and then one.
Thank you. My name is Stella. I'm from Empire Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And my question is, what are some of the effective approaches that you have implemented to encourage and or incentivize employees to submit fresh ideas? And how do you maintain such culture? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I told the story before about the program we created called Idea Box. That's one way we do it. We ran another event coming up here in about 3 weeks called Take Initiative Days. It's actually a 2-day hackathon. It's a fairly standard approach. But one of the things that we've done with it is something. I'm a former developer, and one of the challenges that we put out there is one that really motivates developers, by the way, which is hard to do. And the whole point of Take Initiative Day is if you're a developer and you look in your roadmap, there's probably a feature or a thing that you've wanted to develop that always seems to be 2 revs away, and every time you think you're about to get to it, it flips out again, it moves out again, and you never really get to it. And the whole point of Take Initiative Days for us is actually to take, you have 2 days to grab that thing you've always wanted to work on, surround yourself with a team, and get it done now. Right? And so the whole point is to pull that forward, and it's incredibly motivating for developers. We literally will have over 12% of the employees of Mastercard participating in that program around the world in about 16 different locations. So, just finding these different activities that engage employees around something that they want to do that's valuable. And your employees actually want to help your company. Find ways to unlock that. Again, this program might not be the right one for you, but there is a right one for the culture of your company. And I would just keep experimenting until you find the right ways to unlock it.
Yeah, we have 2 ways to do it. One is a real-time way we can actually input feedback in the actual app and say, this is where we think things could be better. And our developers continually enhance those. So a lot of the enhancements and upgrades that you see on the app, we're actually the ones thinking about. And then second, specific to the enterprise and the sales piece, each quarter we have an all-hands meeting. And at that all-hands meeting, one person, the winner essentially, can come up and present a new business idea about a specific vertical or a challenge that could be resolved with the access of transportation. And then from there, much like you, much like you, see, I'm a millennial, my voice still cracks. We can continue to
Not really my issue.
Much like you, instead of moving forward. Right?
So the last thing I would say very quickly is the other thing that can unlock a lot of that potential is partnerships. So by the way, with Lyft, for example, we work together so that the drivers that they have, they want to get paid more frequently than every 2 weeks. And so we worked together with them to utilize our rails to pay their drivers anytime the driver says they want to get paid for everything that they've done up till now today, right? And so you can just listen for these needs in partners like folks like Lyft to help unlock new opportunities for your business.
So I think we're out of time, but I don't know if there's a chance for one more question, Mireille, or because I'm seeing this hand go up a lot.
Yeah. One thing that Omar said, John said, I'm from Mastercard. I think it doesn't matter what company you're from. It's whether you're a startup or a 50-year-old company that has a proven business case that's successfully performing. It's whatever the business you're in, it's how do you diversify your revenue stream, right? So Omar talked about being Lyft, right? And being in the business of pleasing customers in the transportation. So how do you take that transportation avenue from customers to healthcare? We are at Mastercard. We initially started facilitating payments for credit and debit for banks and merchants. And now we are going through every single avenue possible, from ACH, P2P, everything you could think of. If you look at Google's business, right, they started out as an ad platform, and now they're touching into email, social, everything. Same thing with Facebook.
Self-driving cars.
We're keeping you alive.
But I think
Barely. Hello. The bets.
Just marrying technology with
monitoring your home.
Kind of diversifying in every area, right? To kind of survive.
Well, thank you. I think our time is up, but obviously I think all the speakers will be here if anybody wants to ask some more questions. But I just want to thank you. It was really a fascinating conversation, and thank you to all of you.